Hello, fellow coffee consumers and crime connoisseurs. Welcome to the 19th episode of Mugshot Mornings, where we explore true crime one sip at a time. Today, we are going to be unraveling a case that spans decades, crosses state lines, and leaves more questions than answers. It is the story of a loving mother and her young daughter who seemingly vanished into thin air, a husband whose secrets unraveled long after his death, and a family that is still searching for justice. What happened on that quiet June day in 1978? Who was responsible, and how could their whereabouts remain a mystery for over 40 years? We'll be covering the disappearance and alleged murder of Grace and Gracie Reapp. Now, I do want to address the elephant in the room. I do have a cold. I am sick. I had a fever like all last night, and just really stuffy and just congested up here, so I wanted to sit down and film. Really, this is the only time that I could, but also if I sit and I rot when I'm sick, I mean, this is probably everybody that shares this experience, but I feel horrible. I don't know what it is, but I feel so much worse and I don't get better. But if I'm doing something, if I'm moving around, like I try to clean, I feel like I get over my sickness quicker. But yeah, so I am stuffy, I am congested, and I know that I sound really gross. I don't know why, but it took me like 4 tries to even say this correctly. So sorry. But today, just to kind of make it a little bit easier on myself, I do have a short video, only because this is a missing video. This is an unsolved mystery, so that is what we will be discussing today. But as always, before we get into the video, I am drinking a hot coffee, and well, it's kind of like room temperature now. It's definitely cooled off, but just to soothe my throat. Also, I can't really like taste a whole lot, but I did go to Scooter's and I just got a normal caramel latte with oat milk, just a hot latte, and it's really helped. Like, I've felt that my throat has calmed down, but I'm still very much like little ASMR for you. Yeah, so last night I did have a fever. I slept like crap, and I don't know if this is just me, but does anybody else like take a really hot bath to sweat out their fever? I know that that's probably dangerous, but that seems to be the only thing that helps me. And if that's just me, if that's just an original experience, please don't tell me. Like, let me just have this. Oh, I did want to say something about the podcast for the audio listeners. I was looking at my analytics. The podcast on the audio only for like Spotify and Apple Podcasts and everything like that, it's doing much better than YouTube. And I can't even begin to explain how thankful I am. But one thing is, now I cannot begin to explain how insane this is. Like, I'm getting emotional. The podcast has over 1,000 downloads. Finland, 25% of my listeners are in Finland. 13 are in Canada. 6% is Australia, Germany, UK, Denmark, Norway, Hungary, and Poland. And I mean, I'm reaching everywhere in the United States, and it's so cool to see. Like, thank you guys for listening and tuning in and downloading. You know, if you are here on, I'm going to go ahead and say this. If you're here on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe. I post content that revolves around all things crimes, cults, conspiracies, unsolved mysteries, anything really that I just kind of want to talk about, to be honest. Go ahead and subscribe, and then if you are audio only, go ahead and download the episode and rate it and like it, share it with your friends. I am so appreciative for everybody that has downloaded it. I think that it's insane that I have reached across the world in such a short amount of time. So thank you so much. That's so cool. Like I said, this is going to be kind of a short episode, but it does need attention. This does take place in the United States in the 70s, but it does stretch out until the mid 2010s, the teens. Let's just get into it, okay? So there's not a lot of pictures of these people, so y'all are gonna have to see my face pretty much the whole time, so sorry. So we have Grace and Michael Reapp, who were both 20 years old, and they married in 1965. They lived in Jericho, Vermont, on 10 acres of land just south of the Canadian border. They go on to have 3 children, 2 boys, Brian and Patrick, and the youngest was a girl named Gracie, who they named after her mother. While the kids grew up, Grace stayed home and tended to the things around the house, while Michael worked as a local postman. They had what seemed to be a very loving home, and it was your typical family life with the white picket fence, the stay-at-home mom, and the working father. Fast forward to 1978. The parents, Grace and Michael, are both 32 years old. Gracie was 5, Brian was 11, and Patrick was 8. Both boys are attending Jericho Elementary School. On June 6, 1978, Brian and Patrick were filled with excitement. It was their last day of school and the very start of their summer vacation. That morning, their mother had made them breakfast before they went on their last day of school. When the boys arrived home, they were met with confusion. Their mother and little sister were nowhere to be seen. Grace and Gracie had just seemed to disappear. When they asked their father where their mom and sister were, he just told them that they left to stay with family and they were never coming back. The 2 boys were very confused. Why would their mother abandon them, and why did she only take their sister? Michael didn't even really seem to be concerned either, not even upset or sad. He didn't even report them until 5 days later on June 11th, 1978, but only because Grace's sister called to check in to talk with her. This is obviously really alarming. His wife and daughter had just left and vanished and disappeared. You'd think that that day he would be contacting police. If Grace also wanted to leave Michael, she probably would have taken all of her children. What makes his behavior even more concerning is that only 10 days after the 2 girls were missing, Michael heads to the courthouse to file for divorce from his wife. He told them the reasoning: desertion and intolerable severity. Now, intolerable severity typically refers to a situation where one spouse's conduct is so harsh, cruel, or abusive that it makes continuing the marriage unbearable for the other spouse. Pretty soon after Grace and Gracie are reported missing, and Michael had filed for divorce, Michael was questioned by police. Grace's family had noted that it would be uncharacteristic for her to abandon her sons. When police were questioning Michael, he admitted that he had been cheating on his wife with several women. He noted that he even was having one at the time that she had disappeared. He wrote a letter to Grace's family in December of 1978 that Grace was having an affair and she left him and her sons behind because they all knew about it. Only Gracie is the one who didn't know. 1 year later, in July of 1979, Michael's divorce was granted. However, only 4 months later, he remarried to the children's babysitter. Police were suspicious of him, but there wasn't any evidence linking him to anything, partially because there were no bodies, but things weren't just adding up, but they didn't really have a reason why. They just knew that no one had seen or heard from Grace or Gracie, including the alleged family that they had went to stay with. Police searched the property and questioned him multiple times, but they never could find anything, so they did not arrest him. Michael moved his family to Florida in 1983, and he divorced from his second wife only 2 years later in 1985. He was still being questioned by police even in Florida, but still he stuck to his story. As investigators continued to dig deeper into Michael's life, some very interesting information comes to light about his second wife, the babysitter. She apparently had gotten pregnant at some point before Grace and Gracie went missing, and Michael made her get an abortion. Now, this next snippet is a little unclear because I'm not sure if she followed through with the abortion and then they had another baby a few years later right before they moved to Florida. But when they moved to Florida, they did have another baby with them along with Brian and Patrick, so it was a family of 5. Later, the oldest son, Brian, who was 11 at the time of Grace and Gracie's disappearance, goes on to state that he had a strange feeling from the beginning that it appeared to him that things were just off. He goes on to state, "He moved us from Jericho to Big Pine Key in the Florida Keys. It happened so quickly. I missed my mom and my sister, and then I had this new family." The details of Michael's life after this point are pretty fuzzy, but we do know that police still had their eye on him. They continued to talk to him, made it known that he is not scot-free, and they probe further into his past to see if they can uncover anything of substance. Yet, of course, Michael just continues to say that he had nothing to do with it, and he still believes, after all of this time, that Grace left with Gracie and they've been living with family. 1986 brings renewed hope to the investigation when the remains of a woman and child are found in Allentown, New Hampshire. Grace's family rushes to provide dental records for her and Gracie in an attempt to match those remains to their loved ones. Unfortunately, they were not a match. The woman and child found are actually connected to the Bear Brook murder cases. Now, that is a story that I would like to do a episode on one day, because it is kind of revolved around someone that they named the Chameleon Killer, and it's really interesting. And he was a serial killer, and it's a really sad story, but anyways, back to the story. It is apparent at this point that the case is kind of growing cold, going nowhere, but police refuse to give up and still search the Reapp's old property back in Vermont. However, in 1996, police officially reclassified Grace and Gracie's missing persons cases as a homicide. Also, sometime in the 1990s, Michael remarried again, still living in Florida. Tragically, Patrick, who was the middle son, was living in Germany and he passed in 1996 from natural causes. I'm not entirely sure what he passed from, that's all I saw, but he wouldn't have been old enough for natural causes, so that's very confusing. But either way, I don't know any further information. He just passes away in Germany. Brian and Michael are still in contact at this point until randomly in 1996, Michael up and left Florida in October of 1996 to New Orleans, Louisiana. In November 1996, Brian tells police that his father is missing. His truck was found a month later in December, later abandoned at an airport in New Orleans, but he was missing. Brian states, "I filed a missing persons report. I couldn't let him get away." So this is kind of indicating that Brian had a feeling that his father was involved with the disappearance of his mom and sister. And Grace's sister, Juliana, the one that called earlier to check in on her, which was the whole reason why he told police in the first place, she was very adamant in the case and was the sole pressurer on police to reopen the case again after they kept closing it. She told police that she was aware that Michael had abused her sister physically. Juliana paid also for personal ads in the newspaper that said, "Grace, call your sister Julie." The Social Security Administration also confirmed to Juliana that Grace had not been employed anywhere since she had disappeared. Juliana was so involved in finding the two girls that she became a dispatcher in Connecticut, and she spent her spare time searching for her missing family. So, Michael's car is at the airport, and it leads investigators to believe that he could have either flown away or he was using this as a diversion. But either way, Michael is nowhere to be found. Police would continue the search for years, as they still believed Michael was their prime suspect in Grace and Gracie's murder. Authorities had come into possession of Michael's fingerprints and would go on to compare these with all of their databases. Perhaps he had gone and gotten himself arrested somewhere in the country. However, they still came up with nothing, and the case still remained unsolved until June 2006. Authorities officially charged Michael Reapp with first-degree murder of his wife and the second-degree murder of his daughter. They theorized that Grace was killed because she found out about Michael's affair, and Gracie had witnessed her mother's murder, so he killed her too. So this was 2006, 10 years after Michael had went missing, 20 years after the disappearance and alleged homicide of Grace and Gracie. They charged him even though he was missing and they couldn't make an arrest, and they charged him even though they didn't have the bodies of Grace and Gracie. However, in 2010, only 4 years after the arrest warrants were issued to charge Michael with his family's murders, authorities were stunned by new developments of the case. Michael Reapp was dead, and he had been since 1997. Michael had made it to Arizona after leaving New Orleans, and on January 10th, 1997, he carjacked someone at gunpoint. He kept the owner in the car, and somehow his victim escapes, and Michael gets in this high-speed chase with police. He ends up getting cornered, and when police go up to the door, they discover that Michael had killed himself by shooting himself in the driver's seat. Now, And I'm not saying that this was just because of the high-speed chase. Obviously, that's a crime. But this truly just shows his guilt. This shows that he had something to run away from, of course. Maybe the guilt had really caught up to him of what he had done in 1986. And while he was on the run, he finally got involved with the police, and he just knew that there was no more running, no more escaping, and so he took the cowardly way out. So this part as well is insane. Back in New Orleans, you know how his truck was still at the airport in New Orleans? Well, the only thing that he seemed to have taken with him was his toothbrush and a pack of cigarettes. He had left his ID in the truck, which helped police identify that it was his truck. But because his ID was left in his vehicle, when he was arrested in Arizona, they had no way of identifying him. So in Arizona, he was buried in an unmarked grave labeled as John Doe for 13 years. It wasn't until 2010 when the FBI got involved where he was identified. Grace's family had mixed emotions after learning that Michael had been dead since 1997. Brian stated, "There was a little bit more closure in knowing he wasn't going to keep running, but I still don't have my mom and sister." Grace's sister, Juliana, was truly the rock of the family. Over the years, she collaborated with police, coordinated over 25 digs on the family's Vermont property, and even consulted psychics in desperation. There was another theory proposed that Grace planned to divorce Michael, but he killed her to keep control of the children. Gracie may have witnessed the murder, and he killed her to silence her. Investigators suspect Michael disposed of the bodies before the boys returned home from school. Grace and Gracie's remains have never been found despite countless searches with ground-penetrating radar and FBI involvement. It is believed that their remains are somewhere on the property, but who knows? Juliana continues to hope for answers, while Brian struggles with the emotional toll of his losses. Brian is now 47 years old and still uses his time to search for his mother and his sister. He stated in an interview that he wants to move back to Jericho. He explained that he believed his father may have buried his mother and sister in the woods near their home because he knew those woods well. I don't know if I have any Vermont listeners or people just surrounding that area, but if you have any information about Grace and Gracie's disappearance, please contact the Vermont State Police at 802-244-8781. That is pretty much all that I have for today. There wasn't a whole lot of information about this case, except, because it's obviously unsolved. I feel like it's technically solved, we know that obviously he was involved in some way. We know that obviously he was charged with their murders. I personally obviously believe that I think that he did it. Hey, that was a lot of words. Let me try that again. I believe that he is responsible for their deaths and their disappearances. I don't know if he would have done it on the property. I don't know why. I don't think that he would have done it there. But I do believe that obviously I don't know how he did it. I don't know. I believe the theory that Gracie had witnessed it, and that's why he killed his daughter as well. There's so many stories of people killing their spouses after an affair. It's like, I told Aaron, my husband, I said, if you cheat on me, I'm not gonna kill you, and I don't want you to kill me. But I've also instilled into him that if he doesn't want me anymore, to just leave me before he does that. So we're kind of on a clear understanding, because we were both cheated on in the relationships right before we got with each other. So we have a clear understanding that we're not gonna cheat on each other because of how horrible it sucked. But I told him because I know so much about true crime, and I love true crime, but I told him there's so many stories of women, or even men too, who cheat on their spouses, and then instead of just dealing with it and getting a divorce, they just kill each other. What goes through your mind? Genuinely, if Aaron cheated on me, I wouldn't kill him. I would literally just be like, what the hell? It'd be a lot more than that, but then we would just divorce, and then I would just move on. I'm literally rambling at this point, so it's fine. Okay, guys. I think that is going to be it for today. If you have any knowledge at all of where they may possibly be, or know of anything of the case that would help to solve this case and give the family closure, please contact the number that I stated earlier. I'll also have it in the description below, so you don't have to find where I had said it. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in and listening. If you are interested in true crime and all things like that, please be sure to like and subscribe and tell your friends. I post every single Thursday. I also, for if you want to just do audio only, or for my audio listeners, I'm available on all podcast streaming services. So be sure to download the episodes, not subscribe there, but rate the podcast 5 stars, leave a review. And yeah, I think that'll be it for today. I still have my Movavi code until December 15th. I still have an affiliate code with NordVPN as well, and I will have that in the description if you are interested in that too. So check the description, and I will see you guys next Thursday. I'm gonna put the mic down so I can say it. Bye.